Hey everybody, it's Tony Beaman again for another edition of Beaman with Tony. I have an incredible guest I cannot wait to talk to. He is one of the original founders of Fat Merchant, which now is Stacks, and is currently co-founder of Brand XR, which is a no-code augmented reality platform and award-winning XR creative studio. So much more to talk about, none other than the great Kunal Patel.
Thanks. I
Absolutely.
guess under these glasses and scruff, there's some blushing going on.
I hear you, man. I mean, you've done some pretty amazing things that we can't wait to talk to you about. But man, from my research, now you're from Detroit, is that correct?
I'm from Detroit. Yeah. No,
Right
that's
on, man. Tell us about how you grew up in Detroit, and then you went to University of Miami? Is it right?
University of Miami. Yeah.
Man, how'd you grow up in Detroit, and what took you from there to the U?
Yeah. So, yeah, I ended up at a totally different than I thought when I was growing up. I thought I was going to go to University of Michigan. But I ended up going to, much warmer climates. So, I really enjoyed my childhood, in Detroit. My parents, both Indian immigrants. They met in New York, got married. I was born in New York, but then I moved, I think we moved to Michigan when I was like 1 or 2 or something like that. And so basically I grew up in Michigan and I had some cousins that were there. But when I was younger, I was in Detroit. I was in Detroit public schools. I was a product of that. Um, and I thought, I had really great teachers there, really great friends. It's a city that, is very blue collar. Like you just really are like working really hard. You see everyone else working really hard. Um, you end up with just like a lot of grit, being in that kind of city. Um, and especially where I was like growing up, it wasn't like people were driving around in Range Rovers or things like that. It was more like everybody had some kind of problem going on. And even in our school, like we lost funding for a lot of things. So it's like we had art class and then we didn't. We didn't have money for art anymore. Like that's kind of a weird thing to hear as a little kid. And even then like the science teacher saying like, hey, we don't have money for field trips or some of the experiments that we've been doing. And it's like, oh, that's a weird thing. And but it's something I didn't appreciate until I was older and I could like think back to childhood and like, oh, that was pretty messed up. Like not understanding economics and that kind of stuff. But at the time, the teachers, I remember like had a chat with I think some of us students. I think they were going against like with the school board and the principal and stuff like that. Again, looking at it from adult eyes, where they spent their own money. My art teacher became my social studies teacher. And I remember when the principal would walk by, he would like kind of peek out and then say, okay, he's gone. And then he'd bring out the art supplies and teach art anyways. Or like the science teacher would still do all these different experiments, but they were spending their own money to do this, and so this is really impressive now looking back at it. But when I look at what I'm doing today, it was really shaped by those teachers I had in Detroit public schools. Because growing up, I would always say, when somebody asks, what do you want to be when you grow up? I'd always say, oh, I want to be an artist and a scientist. I would never say one or the other. I'd always say, I want to be an artist and I want to be a scientist. And when I look at like, hey, I'm in gaming technologies, I was in the games industry. I'm working in AR and VR and with Brand XR. And it's like, that is science and art. I studied computer science at the U and I studied computer animation. And it's like, oh man, that stuff that happened when I was in Detroit public schools had a really big impact. And again, I never really thought about it deeply until I was like in my 20s. And I was thinking like, oh, why did I do any of the stuff that I'm doing? Oh, shoot. Yeah, it was that stuff from when I was a little kid.
Man, that is really incredible. I mean, it really is not often at all that you hear people really put a lot of credit to their teachers and stuff, particularly when they maybe you've come from an environment in schools where um, the funding and stuff like you talk about. I mean, it's wow, wow. Are there any particular people that you can look back and point to specifically who had an an impact on you to maybe direct you to Miami or how did
So
you how was it the art and the science? I mean, my gosh, that's incredible.
yeah, I mean, I guess like, part of that was just what set me in the direction of the things that I liked. Um, and thinking back to elementary school, it was like Mr. Casper, our art teacher, Mr.
Man.
Ewald, my science teacher. Um, and then, later on we moved to the burbs, right? Like my parents, immigrants' parents, like they kind of like they were entrepreneurs. So they owned an Indian grocery store, gas stations, convenience stores. Like my dad delivered pizzas, delivered newspapers, had like a little shop, like every stereotypical thing you can think of, like in terms of like immigrants. Like my dad was Apu, like he had a convenience store and all that. And so my mom ran the Indian grocery store. Um, so I got a lot of entrepreneurial spirit from them, from seeing them actually do it. And then, when we moved to the burbs, like, it's kind of like, hey, we saved up enough money to like move out of the city, move into supposedly a nicer neighborhood. You move to the burbs, and really everything kind of changed, including demographics. Like in Detroit public
Mhm.
schools, like all my friends were black. And there's one white kid, Justin, and he was like almost like a mythological unicorn. It's like, oh, we'd never seen a white person before or something. Like it's like everybody's
Uh-huh.
like, we gotta be friends with Justin. Um, and then we moved to the burbs, and it was completely opposite, where everybody was white, and there's like one kid named Rod, and he was black, and it was like, oh, we gotta be friends with Rod. Um, and the school was supposedly better, the facilities were better, but actually, no knock to my teachers, in that area, but they weren't as good as the ones that I had. Because I remember just
Really?
coming into it, and we were doing like addition, subtraction, multiplication tables and stuff like that, and we were already doing algebra in like third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, in Detroit, because those teachers were like almost overcompensating for like what they were lacking. And so, so that just kind of is where things happen. But overall, I just grew up really loving computers and games and Nintendo and technology. And I was just thinking about like how, I want to make this stuff.
Mm,
I want to make video
mm.
games. I want to make cartoons. And so I just kind of kept that love. And and then, eventually my parents just got tired of the cold, like being in Michigan. And they're like, you know what? Let's move to Florida. Let's move to Orlando. And and then they made that move, and I was kind of unhappy about it. Like I moved during high school. And so then I end up coming to Orlando and finished high school at Lyman High School in in Seminole County in Orlando, Florida. And I met a few friends there. And again, like I was still thinking, still having this love of Michigan and Detroit and stuff like that. Like, I'm gonna go to University of Michigan. Um, I'm gonna go back. But like, you go into this college application process, and then I started taking tours started going to all the different colleges, and fell in love with Miami. Um, just felt, you go to the campus, and it's like a resort. And also like you kind of get this independence from your parents. Like my parents were probably trying to like bribe me into like, why don't you go to UCF? We'll get you a car. You're gonna be right here. You don't even have to stay in college. You can stay at home. Like so that they really wanted me to just stay with them. But I wanted to have my independence. So like that was like, yeah, I'm gonna move out of state or whatever. But Miami was kind of like it wasn't even a compromise because I wanted to go there. But it was like far away enough that they're not just gonna show up on a random like
Yeah.
Tuesday. right? And if I wanted to come back home, it's not that far away. It's 4 hours. So it turned out to be a really excellent choice. Um, it was you know, a private university. I'm very grateful that like I did well in school and I got
You don't
scholarships.
take just anybody there, but
No, it's and it was one of those
that's
things
pretty
where
incredible. You
yeah,
accepted for one.
yeah, it was a great school, um, private university, top 50 school. Um, Football program was really excellent when I was there, so I got to enjoy a lot of that. And yeah, it's fun time. Miami's a fun city to be very young, and
Oh my goodness, tell me
yeah,
about it. I used to live in South Florida in the '90s when I was in my late 20s, and yeah, that was
yeah. So
great time
it was a great time. It
to
was a
be
great
young.
time.
Keep going, man. I mean, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well, and by the way, excuse me, like I'm gonna be walking through the hallways of my office here in a little bit. I just saw like power was running out. But I studied computer science at University of Miami. Um,
Mhm.
Originally, I was thinking I might do medicine because I don't know, I did like the thought of like helping people. I felt like I could be a good doctor. Um, it's kind of cliche, like it's like, I was going to be a doctor like any good Indian. Your parents kind of like force you to like go into healthcare or something like that. My parents weren't doing that, but it was kind of like I was feeling that, like just seeing a lot of other friends and family
Mhm.
that were becoming doctors. And honestly, like most of my friends that were Indian that were at Miami were all doctors. They're all pre-med or something like that. So I'm one of the few Indians of that class that actually went into technology. So in a sense, I have really great healthcare. I can reach out to anybody, any old college buddies, and there's some form of doctor. So
Oh, yeah, man, my sister's a doctor. Yeah, she graduated from Yale Medical School, but I can tell you that I remember from when I got my MBA, everything else, there's at least from the mathematics and the engineering, all that. Hey, significant Asian, Southeast Asian population.
yeah,
There are very few Americans, I'll say.
yeah, completely. Um, but yeah, when I started there, but ultimately I was like, my love is actually in technology. My love is in computers. My love is in creative arts. And so then I studied computer science, and then I started doing computer animation as well. And I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with it exactly, because at that time, this is the early 2000s. Um, the smartphone wasn't around yet, and the big consoles, were like PlayStation 2 and Xbox 360 and all that, and that you had to be like a multi-million-dollar company to even be able to make games for that kind of stuff. But like I was thinking maybe I become a Pixar, artist, like that would be cool, or work at
Hmm.
ILM. Um, but ultimately, I started discovering, video games might be the place where I can kind of like scratch all my itches, like we graduated and the first thought is like, so, all right, now what do I do with this degree? Like, am I going to write accounting software or going to make video games? And you would always think the dream would be just make video games, but um, I kind of went into consulting in corporate America, and I became a consultant for some tech companies, and then I eventually became a lead software architect for a plastic manufacturing company of all things. Um, but like I was traveling around for a bit, and eventually that brought me back to Orlando to fill that role. Not
Man,
video games, but what I would do is every single chance I had PTO, or I could take a vacation, I would fly to California and go to the game developers convention. They call it GDC. Or I would talk to somebody online and get a tour of some tech company in Silicon Valley.
really?
And so my vacations were not to like Cancun or anything like that. It was to California. Um,
Really?
just to meet different companies, take tours, get to know people, get to know products, be in message boards and find some new product that was just kind of coming out or an experimental stage. Talk to somebody, turns out it's an engineer at a company or whatever, and it's like, oh man, that'd be awesome to take a tour. Or I make an excuse and say, oh, I'm gonna be there like during these weeks. Any chance I could come by and maybe take a tour? Oh, okay, if you're gonna be here, then yeah, fine, I'll give you a tour. When in
Really?
fact, I was not gonna be there. I was gonna find out if I could get some tours and then figure out. Now I'll go there and get a couple of these tours or meets at the same time, and then I started building up this network over there, and that helped out a lot because when I was going from this place of I was this ultimately rose to be like CTO of this plastic manufacturing company, and I wanted to do my own company. I had this network already. I had some products that I could already sell, like new products that were coming out of Silicon Valley that I could sell or implement, and that helped me get my first tech company off the ground.
I think I saw too that that like when you were first starting, if I'm correct, that when you were starting your first company that you went to your old boss and they actually ended up giving you an office space right there.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah. It was kind of a weird conversation.
Wow.
So
first off, I mean, you have to have been pretty incredibly valuable for them to even let you consider that. I mean, and having a great relationship, because wow, man, that's pretty awesome.
It is. In some sense, it's like, again, you look back in time, and I think, like most people would be afraid to talk to their boss about this because you'd just be like pissed and like, oh no, in fact, you're fired. But like, I think I wasn't afraid of that. And I think that was because like, I was, I guess I just had the confidence, for a couple different reasons. I think my parents instilled that in me, that like you want to be innovating, you want to be moving upwards, and things like that. And so I think that I'm lucky that I had that. And two, that company is where I earned my real world MBA. I didn't go to school for an MBA, but that was the company where I learned what business was, and how it worked or how it didn't work. It was also like where I think my innocence of what adults are was broken. Like that you grow up your entire life and you think adults know everything, or like adults know the answer. And then I'm there in my like early 20s and just being like, oh no, adults out in the real world don't know everything. They're like kids, and so, but I was learning
as we go, huh?
yeah. But I learned like, oh, okay, in a company, there's customer service, and then there's the salespeople, and then there's accounting, and then there's manufacturing, and there's people on the manufacturing floor, and then there's like getting the product actually made through production, and then like Q&A and shipping and logistics and getting it to the customer, and then the executives, and then the politics that exist in a company. And it's like, why does this department hate this department? Why does that person always like talk bad about this person? Or like all these different things, these different dynamics. Absolutely. And, like learning all that. But I was Switzerland. I was in technology, and I guess like I was Switzerland. I was everybody's friend. And so it allowed me to like kind of like not fall into, this role of any one clique. I kind of free floated throughout everywhere. And so being friends with everybody, I kind of heard everybody's gripe and just kind of thought to myself like, oh, well, this is just a misunderstanding. Or like, oh, this is a problem just because that person didn't want to like explain things the way they should. All these different things. And in doing that, it did allow me to like help that company in a really, really big way, where they had a shipping and logistics problem They had like, I want to say like 20 different managers hired and fired over a 4-year period. And I was just thinking like, isn't that a lot of people?
Wow.
I'm like, yeah. And it's like, there's all these problems. And then I just started learning that like, oh, they had an older person who would be sick a lot. And he was writing down where products were on a sticky note and would put that on a rack where all the product was. But then sometimes the sticky note would fall off. And then if he was out sick, then no one would know where anything is. And I'm like, okay. And then that's the reason why it takes 2 hours or to find something and ship it out. And then that's a problem. And then, so I just started doing all this stuff. And I actually just wrote software from scratch. I created an entire like warehouse management and shipping logistics software, because I found out from the executives, like one of them didn't want to spend the money to implement some kind of like massive software to handle all this. And it was just creating problems in the company. And so instead, like, of more people just like complaining about warehouse and shipping and logistics and blaming people and all that, I just wrote the software to manage the whole thing. And I talked to the people in the warehouse and saying like, hey, everybody hates you. Like, what is up with that? And it's like, yeah, it just sucks. Well, let me tell you what, I'm gonna build something. Um, and we're gonna implement that in the next 2 weeks. But I need you to come early and I need you to stay late and help me get this whole thing organized. And so I wrote this software that like kind of organized the entire warehouse. So every rack was like, you know, rack 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You go down the aisle, it's like A, B, C, D, E, and you go up different levels, 1, 2, 3, 4. So there were like bin codes. So you knew where everything was stored. And it was like, in some sense, it felt like I was being innovative, but like I didn't invent warehouse logistics management. It's like, it's just I was building it. And and this comes into politics. Um, I talked to some of the executives about like, hey, I think I can write the software that would do all this and manage it. Can I get some funding? Can I get some time? Can I get some help? And all this. And it's like, nope, no, we're not going to do it. We just didn't want to help. And and they're like, nope. And I don't think you should either. You shouldn't do it. I'm like, why not? And it's like, well, there's too many problems. The problem is this person in warehouse, but it's completely blaming others. I was like, okay, well, this is not going to solve anything. So then I just did it in secret. And but I wrote all the software from scratch in 2 weeks. I was extremely single in my 20s, so like I didn't really have to. I had a lot of time. And I did that, and they organized everything. And then I told the CEO, "Hey, do you have some time on Tuesday to come over? I have a surprise I want to show you." And he's like, "Okay, yeah, yeah, I'll come on over. You can't tell me what it is? No, I can't tell you what it is. Just come." And then he came, and he saw everything, and I showed him that like, hey, this is taking 2 hours to do right now. And I took a look at what your forklift gas bill was. And then I showed him a demonstration of this whole thing. It's like, hey, you can now pull these products out in now 5 minutes. And I actually bought laptops and installed Wi-Fi in the warehouse, and then went to into I don't know, I guess maintenance shop, and asked them to construct a holster that they could hang on the forklift and would hold the laptop. And I paid this out of my own pocket. So I put it on my own credit card and everything. But I made the entire solution end to end and showed it to the CEO, and his jaw dropped. And I got a $40,000 raise that morning.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Whoa. Incredible.
Yeah.
That is incredible.
And then the president and the VP were pissed. They were pissed because it wasn't them that like ushered this in, and they were against it. And so what I then realized was like, then there's a period of retribution. And so they were telling some of the people like, hey, I want you to break the system. I want you to back up all the goods and send them 6 truckloads all at once. Let's show them who's boss. I heard this through the grapevine. And then I tipped off warehouse and I said like, hey, the next few weeks are going to be hell. They're going to really try to like mess this up. And that's what they tried to do, but because they gave them heads up, they put in the extra hours to just do it. And in the end, they backed off. They're like, man, this is working. And it was, then I just learned you got to kill them with kindness. And sometimes you got to take a risk and you got to solve the problem. And if you don't have a solution, you sometimes have to create it, and you got to get to the other side of it. And I had some confidence in that. And definitely, for the CEO, like he cared about the solution. And he's like, you know what? Our company is way better now than it was before. And all these departments are happy. And we got to the root cause of it. So I kind of felt like I was in a golden status, had a little bit of golden status. And so when it came time to say like, hey, I got to do my own thing. I want to do my own thing. I want to start a company. He was like, hey, I want you to stay kind of close by. Here you go. Here's some office space. You can build your company here.
Man, you just gave everybody an incredible lesson. Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. That is just I'm blown away. Oh my gosh, man. We can definitely talk all day. Oh my God. I want to fast forward a little bit because there's so much to talk. Oh my goodness. Man, tell us about Brand XR, because now XR from I was trying to do some research. It's kind of a cross between like VR and AR kind of, and you're bringing the worlds together kind of. Is that what the deal is? Okay.
So, everybody's heard of VR, and then people have heard of AR. We chose XR just because, in the end, the entire market is shifting in such different ways that we don't even know yet. And when the company started, the name of the company was actually Brand VR. We just knew like that the aspect of people wanting to experience something in a 3D sense was going to be the way people would want to experience things, how they learn something, how they're entertained, how they decide if they're going to buy something or not. They're going to want that in 3D. They're going to want to experience it. If they're going to want to rent a hotel room, I want to walk into that hotel room. And you know what? This one is actually pretty nice, but a little bit small. And maybe they could swipe right and then they're in a bigger hotel room. And they're like, oh, this is only $10 more? Buy. That is the way that people will want to buy and experience things in the future. If they're going on a vacation, maybe should I go to the mountains or should I go to the beach? And maybe they want to actually see what it would be like to be there. So that part we knew was really important. And we ended up working on a project with NASA and the Kennedy Space Center to make 3 VR experiences. And we just saw that it took a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of people. And if this is simply the way that consumers will want to experience this kind of stuff, it can't take that long and it can't be that expensive and it can't take a lot of people. And so I was seeing a lot of parallels to websites, like back in the 90s, people had the yellow pages, right? And that's what was ringing their phone. And that's how people got business. And then there's this thing called the internet that was coming out. And I remember at that time, again, like, because I like being in tech, I would start saying like, hey, I can make a website for you. Or people would think about making a website, but at that time it was super expensive. And I remember people saying like, nobody is going to look at a tiny little TV and type in www.something.com. That's stupid. My phone is ringing because I've got an ad in the yellow pages. And then you fast forward 5 years. And then if you didn't have a website, you were invisible. And so the same thing I kind of saw happening here. That's like, oh, it's really hard to make this thing. It's kind of expensive. And maybe it seems a little clunky, but this is what people will want. This is where things are moving. And so that's kind of what sparked creating Brand XR ultimately, which is creating a software that's kind of like a Squarespace or a Wix or a Shopify, where you can drag and drop things yourself. And you can make a 3D experience for your website or for augmented reality with your phone, or eventually a VR headset, or in the future, glasses that kind of look like this that maybe Apple will make, or Microsoft or Google or Facebook will make, or Meta. And then you can see these 3D holograms, of different things. a
Wow.
product you want to buy or whatever. But that stuff has got to be easy. So we're making that tool. We're making that tool so anybody can make a 3D experience for themselves, for their business, for their organization in like 10 minutes.
Wow, Kunal, we have to do part two, my man. There's so much to get to. Oh my gosh, I want to ask you about more about NASA. We got to get to AI and how that's affecting things, my man. There's so much we got to get to. I want to be respectful. Can I want to just ask you in front of everybody, can we have you back for part two here shortly, because we haven't covered enough, man.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm happy to do it. Happy to share.
Fantastic.
I mean, talking to you is great, because I haven't thought about some of this stuff for a while, and it's like going back to it, it's like, oh yeah, that was a thing. Yeah.
You have inspired me a lot, oh my gosh, and that's I'm saying too, there's so much to talk to you about personally. I mean, I was the only Black kid in class growing up, oh my man, we got to have you back with part two, part three, man. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. No,
I love it.
I got some stories. There's, I'll leave you this. I would say that one of the catalysts for like being able to start my game studio and the companies and all that kind of stuff was stowing away on a train in India, and that led to having the resources I needed to come back to America and being able to kick off that leg of my journey. So that was, there's a story there.
Oh man, we're gonna start with that in part two, because I mean, I think that's like a movie in the making. Oh my gosh, are you kidding me?
Yeah, no, it was crazy. Yeah, it's still
that is
on
a
a train and
making. We have a lot to talk about. Thank you so much for being here today. We'll get to you here on part two, and I know our audience is going to be really excited about that as well. Thank you so much for your time today, man. And
absolutely, anytime. Thank you,
Tony. Part two.
All right, looking forward to it.